Welcome back to the Early Weigh-In podcast. This week we break down UFC Vegas 76 and sort of a strange main event ranking-wise, if I'm being honest with you. You know, you got Sean Strickland, who's solidified himself at the top of the middleweight division now, taking on just a one-fight UFC veteran here in Abus Magomedov. Our co-main event, extremely high-level fight at 155. Lines close to a pick'em as well. We've got Damir Ismagulov fighting Grant Dawson. There's a total of 12 fights on the card at the moment. Some real sneaky good fights. And as always, we're going to talk the best fights and our favorite bets on the card. So make sure to do us a quick favor. Like the video. Takes 2 seconds to do so. Sub to the channel if you guys haven't ever before. As far as last week goes, it was a mixed bag of results for the podcast. You got me in the casual cap this week. And, you know, what do you know? I mentioned it last week. And disagreement in the prop section. I had the under 1.5 in the peak fight, and you had Mariscal by decision, which ends up changing your night. For me personally, though, man, I did start off almost 5 units in the hole, and still was not a good night for me. But I did claw my way back to a manageable loss. Before we get into this week, I'll do you the honors of seeing how we finished up for UFC Jacksonville.
Yeah, like you said, you started off the night rough. I know it wasn't looking pretty at first. The first fight of the night was Cody Brundage. You had the under 2.5 rounds in that fight, and Cody Brundage. Um, it was just low level, and you talked about you at least being able to get almost pick'ems whenever you originally played Cody Brundage. And as far as CLV goes, I think you did your job as a capper. And with those kind of fights, variance, there's a lot of things that's going to happen in a Cedric Dumas fight. And even though he won that, he's looking like a future fade to me. Your other straight bet was Neil Magny against Phil Rowe. You had that for 2 units. Another probably a little bit closer than you'd like it to be, but
Right.
it was exactly kind of what we were talking about. Neil Magny just being able to just do enough, just do a little bit more, show that veteran experience to get the nod on the judges' scorecards. And I'm thankful he did get the nod on the judges' scorecards. I do think he won. You touched on the Trevor Peak, Jose Marisal. You had the under 1.5 and the under 2.5. That was a rock'em sock'em robot fight, man. I mean, there were plenty of opportunities for it to finish. I think Trevor Peak's chin might have been the MVP of that fight, man.
Right.
Like, he took some shots that I don't think anybody should be able to take. And then you had a couple of violence plays to end the night. And the Brendan Allen, Bruno Silva under 2.5 rounds, minus 180. And the David Onama, Gabriel Santos fight doesn't go the distance at minus 170. Both those won a little bit of that back, and you ended up tonight only minus 2.36 units. Somewhat manageable from where it started originally. Absolutely. For sure. Looking over at my card, we'll start off with my first straight bet of the night was David Onama plus 190 against Gabriel Santos. Great play, great value. Onama, there are some like huge concerns moving forward with him. With his head movement and just, overall, it just takes too much damage. But at plus 190, I thought it was a good play at, against Gabriel Santos, who was still kind of unproven at the time. That was a nice cash. My 2 other straight bets of the night both missed. I had Wellington Turman at plus 200. I had 1.5 units on him. Another one where I think that was a good play. The thing that was not good about it is it did not play out how I capped it. I didn't expect the kickboxer Wellington Turman to go out there and, try almost outpoint Randy Brown. He put up a really good fight for a plus 200. So I'm okay with the bet. My next one was Trevor Peak. Just straight up, I had 1.2 units on him. I said I was going to do this during the podcast. I ended up not doing it as hard. I originally said I was going to put a couple units on Trevor Peak and then a full unit on the Marisal by decision. I ended up kind of scaling that back a little bit. I only ended up putting a quarter unit on the Marisal by decision. So that ended up hedging. After that fight played out and Marisal won the decision, I ended up only profiting 0.5 off of that play. Then I also had another kind of hedge spot. You chose the violence and under 2.5. And then I chose the ways that these fighters were going to win. It was either Silva by TKO or Allen inside the distance every time. Just a different way to play it, but we ended up both profiting pretty good on that fight. I ended up the night 0.8 units. not going to be able to buy me a Lamborghini or anything like that. But it's a nice little profit for sure.
Absolutely.
We move on to the main event. Very interesting matchup the UFC has given us to be the headliner here. It's in the middleweight division, and it's tough to tell what's happening here. Are they trying to punish Sean Strickland, or are they setting him up for success here? They've matched him up with a somewhat unknown, certainly to the casual fan, somewhat unknown Dagestani fighter in Abus Magomedov, who in his past fights has given quite a bit of evidence in other organizations that he's a very solid fighter with a good striking game, and we got to see that in his debut against Dustin Stolfus, where he was able to score that 19-second win. Certainly would have liked to have seen a little bit more out of him, but I don't think that you could ask for a much better performance from a debutant. Like I said, we did get to see that kicking game a little bit, but I do think that it's his hands that are usually the most dangerous part of his game. He likes to kind of jump in with his shots. He kind of level changes to get a reaction out of the fighters and then almost lunges in. And he has this ability to cover a significant amount of distance when he is striking at range. And if he's not throwing those straight shots, then he's feeding you something up the middle, whether it's, like the up kick that he landed on Dustin Stolfus, or that lead uppercut similar to Hamzat Chimaev. He definitely shows aspects of other Russian bred fighters. There are some foundational Russian characteristics of his fighting game, even though he's not exactly a wrestler by any means. Sean, almost the exact opposite striking game. He stands very straight up, has that cocksucker hand stance. We talked about. He kind of chooses to overwhelm fighters just with that constant forward pressure and throwing his punches at like 70% power. He's got a very unique style where he does like an excellent job of conserving his energy, putting up good volume, and it's because he's not throwing everything into his strikes, knowing that he's a 185-pound man. If one of those land clean, he does have the ability to knock somebody out.
Right.
When it comes down to the wrestling, I do think it'll be kind of a null point. I don't see this fight taking place anywhere other than the feet. I do think I would immediately assume that Abus's pure wrestling game might be a little bit more polished coming out of Dagestan, even though, that's a part of his game that he kind of chooses to ignore for the most part. He'll throw him in every once in a while, but a lot of the times it's him trying to get back up to his feet and showcase his striking. And then Sean, he's a competent grappler himself. He's sporting an 85% takedown defense. So I don't think either guy is holding a significant advantage. And like I said before, I don't think that either guy are going to be looking to spend their energy working to get this fight to the mat. So even with the lack of UFC experience, I do find myself kind of leaning to the Abus side. I know Sean is the type of guy to fight anyone, anywhere, and that's sometimes to his detriment. I think he drew a really tough matchup here against Abus. I expect a super high-paced fight, especially in those early rounds, with somebody coming out on top. I think the finishing upside on Abus with his power, might make me find a play later on in the week. I'm interested to hear what you think because I'm kind of on the fence. I just need a little nudge.
Yeah, so you said it's interesting at the beginning of it, and it is. When you look at why they made this fight, a lot of questions here. And I went back to an interview I found of Sean, and he says really just wanted to stay active. And it seems like the UFC threw him a couple extra dollars to take this fight. But standing back and looking at it, it does seem that they're trying to maybe push a boost in this spot. Strickland, since moving up to 185, I think he's shown a lot of success in a title eliminator with Pereira, and likely could have been next up in line had he gotten the nod against Cannonier there. You talked about him, real fundamental, basic kind of style. He's just real good with forward pressure, man. Has a good jab, and like you talked about, 70%. He doesn't really load up on anything. He's just constantly peppering that volume at you. But it's nothing unorthodox about the guy. There's a jab and there's a right hand, and that's about all that he really throws. You say Abus could have the grappling upside here. I kind of lean the other way. While I think it's completely null and void, I think the one who might show the offensive wrestling is maybe Sean later in this fight, as maybe, if the cardio is starting to take a toll on Abus. I think some takedowns could find some success for Sean. And I think the cardio is kind of what I keep going back to, because it's something that I know is there for Sean. The guy's activities is a massive thing that he's got going for him. He's been in multiple 25-minute fights lately, whereas, Abus has shown me 19 seconds in the cage in the last 3 years. And so one thing I can go back to is Sean will be there for 25 minutes if he's not put away, and he will be throwing the same volume. He will have the same forward pressure. His jab and right hand still going to be there, where I don't know if Abus's tools are going to be at 100% in the championship rounds. This guy's just one fight into the UFC tenure, and that was massive on him to beat Dustin Stoltzfus. And while this is a massive step up in competition, the guy handled Dustin Stoltzfus just like he wanted to. He talked about him coming out of KSW, experience in PFL. He fought for $1 million in 2018 against Luis Taylor, where he got KO'd badly in like 30 seconds. And while
by a weird shot, a glancing blow almost.
Exactly. And I'm not one to say that is indicative of him having a bad chin or anything. It's not, but I do think that he is a very front-loaded guy. I think he's a lot more dangerous early in this fight. You see a lot of his finishes coming in rounds 1 or 2. The guy's only been to decision, I think 6 times in his 30-fight career. To me, he reminds me a lot of a Nasruddin Imavov, who Sean just beat. It's one of these guys who can swap stances, and one of these guys who are one of these like sniping boxers at range and throw good kicks, but put a lot of energy into the shots. And, if Sean's still there come rounds 3, 4, and 5, I can guarantee that I think he's going to have the better output and a better gas tank at there. So if he drags it to the championship rounds, I really start to heavily favor him. But it is very tempting for me to look at Abus at plus money with all the finishing upside I see on him, because that's something that's always tempting to me as an underdog, So I'm torn. I wish I could nudge you on either side. But as the line does creep down with the gas tank and the competition edge, I see a minus 140 out there, implying like 58%. And there is a world where I think Sean could look 60 plus if it gets late. But I also think there's a world where Abus just starches him early and looks like he should have been the clear favorite. So I'm ultimately going to stay off. Middleweight fights constantly going to decision. Abus got the big shots. He got the volume of Sean, who's already been screwed, kind of like in the Cannonier fight, where he lands more shots on paper, but just not as powerful shot in the judge's eyes. So I'm a bit torn. But for the purposes of a pick, I'm going to be on the other side with Sean Strickland, man. As far as co-main event goes, very, very good fight. Damir Ismagulov taking on Grant Dawson at 155. And it's receiving a ton of action, man. Originally in the week, I saw a lot of people like myself on the Damir side. And, as the week has progressed, that minus 150s dropped down to a minus 110 with a lot of love coming in on Grant Dawson. And the one worry for me, both these guys come out of American Top Team, and maybe there is some inside info on the Damir side or on the Grant Dawson side that, is the reason for this money. But I also think there's a possibility that people are capping some intangibles of retirement and motivation into this fight. And while I told you I can kind of, I can put that into the case for guys like Emmett last week who are closer to 40 than they are 35, who have, coming off a title shot loss, getting matched up with one of these, like undefeated prospects like Ilya Topuria. It's easy for me to cap that into them. But for a guy who's only 32 years old, it's not as easy for me here. I actually think the retirement talk could have been more like a spur of the moment. I know the guy wasn't feeling well coming into the Arman fight, it seemed like. And I think he's just kind of, upset, man. His 18-fight win streak got snapped. He knows he's going to have to go through Arman again eventually to get to the belt. And he got clinicked, man. He got 30-27. It's almost worse than getting starched early when you just get dominated for 15 minutes. And I think mentally it might have set him back a little bit. But as far as skill for skill, man, I don't know how you really can't come out on the side of Damir Ismagulov. This guy, about as tested as it gets in his UFC run so far, taking no easy fights. Joel Alvarez, Thiago Moises, Guram, Arman. I mean, this is high level stuff in the UFC's most dangerous division. The guy's a very sharp striker. As far as boxing goes, he's one of the best pure boxers in the UFC. Might have the best jab in the UFC and a long reach at 155 to use it. You look at Guram's face when the fight is over, and he has tore him up with the jab. The guy's got a good left hook. And one thing that I like about him as well is he uses that reach to kind of make guys pay for shots when you exit out of the clinch or when you shoot a sloppy takedown entry and he's able to force you away. He uses that reach to catch guys with his left hooks when they think they're at a safe range. And when I watch back the Arman fights, the Guram fights this week, there are takedown attempts that both of those guys are deep on, man, and Damir is still able to defend them. And it makes me confident here because Grant has to wrestle to win. I do not think there's a chance he wins this fight if he is stuck striking with Damir. I mean, plain as day, Damir's the better striker, and Grant does not have the best striking defense. What he does have, a good single leg, a good rear naked choke. He's good at taking the back, setting in the body triangle. He kind of reminds me of like a lightweight Aljamain Sterling to an extent. And I think the move to American Top Team was the best thing he could have done for his career, if I'm being honest with you. And the Madsen and Gordon fights, maybe they were a step in the right direction. But now we're talking about a guy in Damir Ismagulov who's not an aging grappler, who's a much more different style, and a guy who can really pose you issues on the feet. The Leonardo Santos, the Ricky Glenn fights, they haven't escaped my memory. I'm big on Damir here in this spot. And I cap him around 60, 65%. So I'm on that pick 'em money line, man.
Yeah, I think I might end up finding a spot with you there, especially if that line continues to come down. You voiced a lot of the concerns that I think most people have. The biggest one being that these two guys are at completely different points in their career. Grant Dawson hasn't even thought of the word retirement, and Damir's actually saying it. And although it sucks that has to be part of capping, it does. There's obvious regression whenever somebody mentions the R word, and we've seen that throughout the UFC, and especially in like the last decade. As far as the level of competition, I would definitely agree that Damir has proven that he is able to hang with the better competition. That being said, it sucks that even at the very best of Damir's game, he cannot find a finish. His last 10 fights have all come by decision. And, at least this time we're not having to lay juice on him. So that's nice, but it's still not something that I like to see on somebody that I'm going to go super heavy on when they're not able to, finish the fight on their own terms. I like it when that's at least an option. So it kind of reminds me of like, you know, a different world, but Zalgus Zumagulov, there's a
Lil
world.
Magny.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So but just somebody who, at the end of the day, their entire record has been put into the judges' hands, and there are a bunch of fights that could have gone different ways for Damir Ismagulov, and we could be getting a really nice plus price tag if he didn't win that split decision over Guram. There are other worlds where Grant Dawson at this point in his life, making that move to AT&T, he has refined those parts of his game that were lacking beforehand. As far as what Damir has shown in his game, that gives me the biggest cause for concern. If Grant Dawson is able to take him down, Damir does like to give his back, and that's the go-to move for Grant Dawson. I think that he's much more willing to lock up a body triangle and ride out a round than Arman Tsarukyan was. Arman Tsarukyan's looking for that finish, where I think Grant Dawson at this point in his career, he's trying to get a win here. He's put together some really good wins, all of them, or his last 3 wins by third round finish. And that's something that I like. That means that he's even though a lot of them were close. He was subject to lose that Leonardo Santos fight. I know that he wasn't actually losing on the judges' scorecards, but in everybody else's mind, he was losing that fight. But, 3 third-round finishes, that's evidence that he carries the power into the later rounds. It carries the danger into the later rounds. And he at least has the option to finish this fight before it sees the judges' scorecards, which I think is really what I'm struggling with laying more than a unit on Damir Ismagulov here, even though I completely agree with you. As far as the skill set, overall MMA skill set, I think Damir, hits he's an all-around fighter, and Grant Dawson does have some obvious holes in his game. So I'm with you that Damir Ismagulov is the side here, and as that line continues to lower, I might end up finding a spot myself. Just him being sheerly the better fighter here.
All right.
For my fight of the night, we are going to the welterweight division where we see Max Griffin taking on Michael Morales. Absolute banger that they're putting here in the featured bout on the card. Max is a UFC veteran, and Michael Morales, one of the more promising undefeated prospects, climbing his way up the ranks. Morales, he's 14-0 with his last win coming in round 3 in this back and forth fight with Adam Fugit, where 2 of the judges actually gave Fugit that first round. And I was impressed with his ability to withstand some of those early troubles, finding his groove, and then eventually finding those finishing shots 11 minutes into the fight. Prior to that Contender Series debut he was steamrolling opponents, finishing them all by round 1 or 2 stoppage. And he's kind of always been physically extremely gifted. It's just an incredible physique for the division. And, you saw on the regional tape, it seemed like he always held a significant size advantage, which only helped him dominate in those opponents. But now he's drawn Max Griffin. Max Griffin's 4-1 in his last 5 fights. Max Griffin has more UFC fights than Michael Morales has professional fights, and I think that fact alone is a huge factor in breaking down this fight, man. I really do think that Max is the perfect fighter to extend this fight with Morales, force him to use some new techniques in order to win the fight, because Max is not somebody that gets overwhelmed early in a fight. He's actually got a legendary chin if you look over his record. I do think that his striking is good enough to hang with anybody in the division for 15 minutes. He might not win, but I think he can hang with anybody for 15 minutes. And I'm doubtful that Morales is going to be any different. So while Morales has the youth, the momentum, all that kind of stuff, I do think that he could be running into the biggest test of his career. And I would be, well, I am willing to put money on that Max Griffin will cover his price tag on Saturday. I do think that he's going to give him a much closer fight than these odds are saying.
This is an incredible fight. I do think there's a world where Michael Morales gets his sparks some early. I don't think that's out of the possibility, but I do think this turns into an absolute dogfight, man. You talked about Max, the guy's historically as durable as they come, and just has a way of forcing a slugfest out of guys and extending these fights. And I do think as well that he's going to test the newcomer, their young guy, and Michael Morales. Good boxing. He's shown sneaky power at times. Max throws a good leg kick. Michael Morales doesn't check leg kicks for shit when you go back and watch his tape. Morales, I personally don't have the best read on him, but I do think he's got potential to be a dangerous prospect. I really do. Like you talked about his frame, just great frame for the division. You look at him online, the guy looks to be in just stupid shape. Looks like USADA never visits his house. And at the 23 years old that he is, a year off in between these fights, there's potential for just massive improvements for a guy like this. And really to an extent in his first two UFC fights, he's kind of been tested, man. Trevin Giles called him early in that fight with a big right hand, hurt him. recovers, ends up finding the finish himself a couple minutes later. Fugit, like you said, up on the judges' scorecards in round 1, drags him late into a fight, lands good shots of his own. Michael takes them, finds a late finish. It's things you like to see in a 23-year-old who's undefeated. He likes to hit that step back counter right hand. He's got a long, really long jab, man. When him and Trevin Giles split, and he just lunges into the jab that just that eventually folds Giles. It's almost like Damir, man. He really has a long reach for the division and catches guys off guard. But he looks so good when he does something, but there's times where he doesn't do much, man. And I think anybody who's willing to lead the dance with him and not scared of his power and willing to get the volume in his face, I think they could be live, man. Morales is the pick, but at this price tag, it's dog or pass. And I'd be much more inclined to bet Max Griffin than to lay the juice on Michael Morales.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think Michael Morales is subject to get fraud checked here, man. Re-looking over at his record, if he doesn't find a knockout early, like you said, he could be in some trouble for sure.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. Move on to the heavyweight division for my fight of the night. Alexander Romanov versus Blagoy Ivanov, man. Nothing better than a sloppy heavyweight fight. In UFC, they just love to put them on their main cards. And after a main card that was killer last week, we get the eye poke in low-level heavyweights. And hopefully this one's kept on the prelims where it belongs, man. But it's an interesting one, and it's a somewhat clash of styles. Romanov brings a pretty unique skill set to the heavyweight division. There's not a lot of guys who are just all-out wrestlers the way he is. And, in this matchup, man, he's going to be younger. He's going to be taller. He's going to have the longer reach. I think he's the clear better athlete. But he's sort of a busted prospect to me at this point. The guy doesn't show much on the feet. He has to wrestle to win his fights, and he doesn't really show me that he has the gas tank to do that longer than really for 5 minutes for a round. And it's sure, you can beat Rocky Martinez, Chase Sherman, Jared Vanderaa, but you take any step up in competition, and it looks bad. Gassing badly against Espino and Tybura after round 1 of having some success, and then you proceed to get Alexander Volkov. The UFC is doing you a favor. You lose the Tybura fight, and you're getting an even better fight because the UFC likes you. And
you're saying that the Volkov fight was better than Tybura?
Yeah, I would say so. Not performance-wise, but as far as what it does for your career, absolutely.
Oh, okay. Not an easier fight, but
No. It would much better name for him. It's
gotcha.
You lose to Tybura. You'd think Tybura would be fighting Volkov, and it's no, they give Romanov a step up in competition,
Right.
and the guy shows up 30 pounds heavier than he did against Tybura, and he has one takedown in him, and he folds over it. It truly, man, it was
He
a
turned
Braxton.
into Rocky Martinez.
It was a Braxton Smith type of performance for me, man.
Yeah.
He had a minute and a half of gas tank, but in front of him, Blagoy is a guy who's closer to 40 than he is 30. I know you can get away with that at heavyweight, but the guy's got a ton of fight miles on him. Heaven forbid I leave out the fact he's been stabbed and survived that. But he's a guy at heavyweight. You kind of mentioned it with Damir, man. Even a heavyweight, he's never finding a finish. He's not much of a finishing threat. And as bad as Alexander Romanov is, gas tank wise, I'm not impressed with the gas tank of Blagoy Ivanov either. He's one who really tries to slow these fights down, land a takedown or two of his own, find some cage control. He's a very low output guy and just lets his opponents back into these fights, man. They're always close, and he just sometimes doesn't do enough. When I go back and try to watch Blagoy's career and how he handles this style of fight, there's not a lot of guys on his record that he's fought that bring this style of fight, and you look at Alexander Volkov submitting him back in the day, but you go back and watch that fight, and Blagoy is holding Volkov on the fence for 7 minutes, goes for one bad takedown, and the length of Volkov just kind of reverses the takedown, gets the back and the rear naked choke. And then the only other takedown he's given up, it's in round 3 against Tybura. And while it's late in the fight, but it did come easy. And when he got put on his back, there was not a lot there that he showed me as far as getting back to his feet. If I had ever seen Romanov put on even a 10-minute wrestling clinic that I could think he could an 8-minute wrestling clinic that he could bank 2 rounds here, I think I would be all over the line. But the fact is, I got to see the guy weigh in first, and I just don't know if he can win a solid 2 rounds with the wrestling. I'm going to pick Romanov. I think the guy's got a ton of pressure on him, but I am going to pick him, man. And if he shows up good at weigh-ins, I might bet him. You have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, dude. No, I was about to dive into Blagoy Ivanov hasn't ever fought anybody like Romanov, dude. I don't even think, I mean, just look at the type of guys that he's fighting. This hasn't even been an aspect of the game that he's had to pay attention to in the last decade.
Right.
Even the Volkov fight, it's the child Volkov. It's not the Volkov. It's the Stingray Volkov, not the scary
Yeah.
mask Volkov. So I don't know, dude. I think Romanov round 1 is the play, dude. Like I think he's given us enough reason in the past to he doesn't have much after round 1, and I don't think that he's gonna find the motivation to get in enough shape to somehow overcome his gas tank issues. I think that just like trying to think Randy Costa or like a few other guys who know, well, I can't get my cardio up to that level. My best chances, Terrence McKinney, there we go. My best chances are early in the fight. So I'm going to sell out for a finish early in the fight. And then if the going gets tough, I'll quit. I'll tap out. I'll do whatever. And I really do think that Romanov is more than happy to test the takedown defense of Blagoy early, try and get that early submission, just sell out for something, whether it's just pushing down on his neck with his forearm or actually getting a technical submission. Like I do think that he's big enough and Blagoy's small enough in the heavyweight division that early he is going to have a super big strength advantage, and Blagoy might not move as well as he used to in this older age. And he's finally got a stylistic matchup that could be tough for him, So I'm with you. I think I'm on the Romanov side. I think I'm looking at Romanov, obviously inside the distance. There's no way I'm playing him straight, honestly. It's either inside the distance or it's round 1 for me. But yeah, I think it's an excellent fight of the night to pick. Should be fireworks for sure. Moving on to the fighter section of the podcast. Kevin Lee is who I chose as my fighter, man. Started his career as one of the more promising prospects in the lightweight division when he came into the UFC all the way back in 2014 at only 22 years old. He was cut from the organization in 2021 after his loss to Daniel Rodriguez and immediately picked up by a prestigious Russian-led organization where they threw him to the wolves against one of their most dangerous fighters on the roster, Diego Sanchez.
The nightmare.
But no, for real, you got to look at this one, in my opinion, as somebody in Kevin Lee who got cut from the UFC and essentially took a couple years off, under 30 years old, to round out his game and to recover from the injuries that he's suffered his entire career in the UFC. And I do think that it's finally given him the time to where we have the potential of seeing a completely new Kevin Lee on Saturday. I do think that right now in his career, he has as much experience as you could ask for at the UFC level. I look at how he ended his UFC career going 1-4, and the only fight that he won was when he was also the only fight that he was an underdog in his last 5 against Gregor Gillespie with one of the most insane highlight reel head kicks I've ever seen. And it shows you that the potential is there. He has the ability to I think beat anybody on any given day. But it just, it's which Kevin Lee is going to show up. Like I said, he's already got more high level experience than 90% of the roster with 18 UFC fights. You throw in all the injuries that he's overcome, and to only be 30 years old, it's got to feel surreal to him for having this second chance to try and earn a belt. And what many people would agree is his absolute prime years of fighting. So all that being said, it was an easy choice making him my fighter to watch coming back into the UFC. So yeah, Kevin Lee for my fighter to watch. I think he's got a tough one against Renat, who you might be talking about later on in the podcast.
Yeah, I don't bring him back up, but just because I made the bet on him just earlier, just a couple minutes ago. But Renat Fakhretdinov, I do think he's got Kevin Lee's number here. Kevin's he's like a front-loaded fighter, kind of like Abus. Like you see him have success early against Charles Oliveira, Tony Ferguson, both, but the wheels always fall off for Kevin Lee at some point. I don't like him at welterweight. I think he re-injured his knee against Diego Sanchez, showing me that the injuries are still nagging. They're still there. And I just think the guy's best days are behind him. And I don't think they've done him any favors with this matchup here. As far as fighters to watch for me, I'm going to go with Guram Kutateladze. Hopefully third time's the charm for the guy. Injuries or visa issues have forced him out of his last two fights, but he's part of this Georgian wave making some noise right now. Everybody, including myself, man. I got high hopes for this guy. I think he's very talented. The skill set's there. You see him training with Hamzat. The guy's fought Mateus Gamrot, and Damir Ismagulov in his first two fights. He's 1-1. You could probably flip both of those fights as far as results wise, but he's still 1-1. The guy is a very good fighter, man. He's a really good striker. Tons of nasty kicks. He just switches levels, very diverse. Throws a lot of weapons at you. Inside the clinch, he's got really good knees, good elbows on the exit. And the guy is, shown two submission losses, I believe, early in his career. But looking at him now, man, the guy is hard to hold down. The moment he hits the ground, he is constantly working to get back to his feet. He does have a lot of a taxing style of fighting with all the kicks, the energy, the bouncing around. In the third round, he does tend to slow down a little bit, but as far as this matchup goes, this guy's got all the tools to beat Elvis Brenner here on Saturday. He's just got a ton of hype on him, a ton of pressure to come through here. He's a big underdog, but man, I'm excited for Guram to get back in action. I do think he's a top 20 and top 15 lightweight. He's my fighter to watch this week.
Nice. I like it. So kind of struggling to find a legit underdog. As I've talked about, that I like Abus. That's an underdog that I'm leaning towards. And we kind of already talked about Max Griffin as well as my two dogs that I really like. So I'm going to give a third one. And it's going to be Yana Santos. And I think that we're going to agree on or disagree on this one. But yeah, it's Yana Santos strictly because I think that she can implement the same game plan that Norma Dumont did. When I think of Yana Santos, I think of cage pushing, like same way I think of Marcin Tybura. Cage pushing is a part of her game, and Carol Rosa has subjected herself to that her entire career. And I do think that Yana is a big girl for the division. Carol Rosa is probably going to be at a size disadvantage, and simply Carol Rosa being a minus 170 right now, it's tough. I mean, it's moving up too. So you can sit on this Santos line and maybe get a plus 160. I think that there's no way that Rosa wins this more than 60% of the time. So if that line starts to get out of hand, I do think that Yana Santos, it just being a girl fight, her having the type of style that Carol Rosa has failed against in the past, I think that she's more than enough to be qualified for my underdog of the card.
I got you. Yeah, so I do disagree with you, but I understand the concerns, and that's why while I do cap Carol Rosa around a 60 to 65% favorite, it's just a 1 unit play at minus 155 because of the cage control. Norma Dumont's a big girl, man, and Yana Santos is coming up here to featherweight on short notice. I think the cage control, I don't know how much success she could be. While she may still be the taller girl, I don't know how much physically stronger she'll be in the clinch here. And at range, man, Carol Host is very easy to get behind with landing 100 significant strikes, knockdowns, things like that. So cage control is the one. I understand where it is, and it's a women's fight, man. It kind of leads into this next one for me. The underdog section, I think, is my favorite section of the podcast. Like, regardless of if I don't pull the trigger on it, like Jack Jenkins and Charles Oliveira, or I'm like screaming to the rooftop to bet Zhao Nan and Nicholas Dalby. I really, really like this section of the podcast. This week, I think I struggled more than any other week. But I did find someone on here that has cashed a dog ticket for us before against a similar skill set of opponent before as well, man. And I'm going to go with Luana Carolina. You can get her at plus 185. You know, the girl's she's 3-3. She's a 6-fight UFC veteran at this point. And it's not the worst competition, man. Joanne Wood's on there. Molly McCann's on there. Lupi Godinez, a prominent wrestler, is on there. And she's a decent Muay Thai striker. She fights long. She's real good in the clinch. I think she's got some decent takedown defense. And if this fight goes late, I think there's a cardio edge for her there. Luana she's nothing special by no means. The girl's never even going to touch the top 15. But when I look at her opponent and Ivana Petrovic, like watching a regional tape, man, it's low-level girls to begin with, but I'm not impressed. I think the girl's just an average wrestler. I don't think she finds the same success with the wrestling. I don't think she finds the same success getting on top, finding the same finishes. And it's kind of like Grant Dawson, man. I think she's in another spot where she has to wrestle to win. And if she doesn't wrestle, there's no way she covers this price tag and might even lose. The striking is a work in progress. She's got really good size, and that is the one concern, but she looks kind of slow. So the experience, the cardio, the speed, the striking edge, I do think there's areas of this fight that make Luana Carolina a bit live. Just throw in the fact that we see these debuting women drop the ball at a big price tag all the time. Jacqueline Amorim comes to mind for me against Sam Hughes. When you look at the Jacqueline Amorim girl, apparently she is just mopping girls at AT&T on the mat, man, and comes in there and, you know, blows her wad against Sam Hughes early. And I think there's potential for something like that again here with Petrovic. So I'm going to go with Luana Carolina from Underdog this week.
I like it. I like it. For my prop of the week, kind of going back to the well, same as last week, I had Jose Marisal as by decision. He was a dog already, and then you get his decision prop at a much better price. This is very similar. It's Max Griffin by decision. We have yet another undefeated prospect, and Michael Morales has yet to taste defeat. And I do, like I said earlier, I think Max Griffin has a perfect style to drag this fight out. I don't think that Michael Morales has the grappling game to be able to get the fight, control Max Griffin on the mat. I think in the stand-up game, I touched on it already, Max Griffin can stand with just about anybody for 15 minutes. I do think that he has the more polished striking game of the two, and certainly has proved that he has proven his striking game at a higher level. Michael Morales, subject to get fraud checked. He came in as a dog on the Contender Series, and now he's a significant favorite against Max Griffin, the first real test that he's had to go up against. And I don't count Officer Giles as a true first test. I really don't. I think this 15 fight veteran and Max Griffin, who constantly wins by decision, is a perfect opponent to drag him out, put him into deeper waters than he's used to, and kind of expose some of the holes in his game that I'm sure that he has, being as young as he is and having never tasted defeat. So he's either about to prove to me that he is a legitimate prospect, or Max Griffin, I think, could give him the vet lesson and cash this prop bet for me at plus 450.
I dig it, man. I think that's an excellent spot to look at. I'm going to go with another decision prop for my prop section. I'm going to go with Ismael Bonfim by decision at plus 200. I think it's a lot better way to get the minus 350 down. The Bonfim brothers, they look legit to me, man. Their skill set is there. The boxing in tight, fundamental, looks good. They're great grapplers as well, just very, very well-rounded and very experienced. 22 pro fights for Ismael before coming on to the Contender Series. The guy's patient already. He's not one of these guys that are, 6-0 undefeated, adrenaline dump, blowing their wad, blowing their gas tank early. This guy's been the distance 6 times. He's 6-0 in decision. And I think he's got all the tools to keep this fight on the feet and win a striking battle. Saint Denis has shown us the guy's about as durable as they come, and since taking that life-changing beating to Zaleski, found 2 wins of his own. Doesn't seem to be going downhill. But just like Petrovic, just like Grant Dawson, I don't see him winning this fight if he does not mix in any grappling. I think if he is forced to stay on the feet, I think Bonfim's clearly the better fighter, and I think that's probably what's going to happen here. I've seen enough from Bonfim to know that he's going to keep this fight standing. Might even land some takedowns of his own and find some top time. But I think he stuffs the takedowns, and I think Saint Denis just gets stuck at range with the better striker and loses a pretty clear decision. This is set at over 1.5, which I think is pretty crazy. I think Terrence McKinney had a whole lot to do with Bonfim's last fight hitting the under 1.5. And you throw in an opponent like Saint Denis, who's been the distance, or who's a grappler and likes to stall time if he's having success, and Bonfim, who went the distance his last 3 fights before, even on the Contender Series, and so I think there's a good chance it goes to 15 minutes, and I'm going to take the minus 350 for a much better number.
Yeah, I like it. I also like the over 1.5. I'm pretty sure that's sitting at like plus 180.
Minus 180.
Minus 180. Yeah, minus 180. And yeah, I like that look too. Okay, so for my best bet, this is going to throw you off because I didn't talk about it at all prior to us starting this pod, and I don't think that you're going to agree with it. So double whammy right here. It is fight doesn't go the distance in the main event, and here's my reasoning why. So I think these guys match up perfect for violence. Sean goes to decisions with guys who also go to decision, and Abus is just not that guy.
Yeah.
I take a look at Sean's last 8 opponents. 6 of those went to decision. Imavov, he's had a decision in 4 of his last 6. Cannonier, he's had a decision in 5 of his last 6. Jack Hermanson, decision in 4 of his last 5. Do I need to explain Uriah Hall? Christoph Jocko, decision in 6, all 6 of his last UFC fights. Jack Martian, decision in 3 of his last 4 UFC fights. His finishes, on the other hand, Alex Pereira, 4 finishes in 5 UFC fights. Brendan Allen, 5 finishes in 6 UFC fights. Abus is much more like these guys. I think that Sean fights to his competition, and Abus is the type of guy who's going to kill or be killed in these first 3 rounds. So he's never been 5 rounds. Abus hasn't. He's going to fight a guy who's standing right in front of him. He's not somebody who's going to drag the fight out by making him work with grappling. At least I don't think so early. Maybe later in the rounds when Abus starts to tail off. But then that's when the Sean Strickland finishing upside comes into play. We don't know what Abus looks like past 15 minutes. He could drop the fuck off. The only time that he's gone to decision in his past few fights, one of them was a 2-round fight that doesn't count really. It was like an exhibition or something. And then the other one was against Sayu B. Sai, who we've seen in Bellator pretty good. He's a pretty good fighter. He's long, he's rangy, and it was still only a 3-round fight. I think that these guys are going to go head to head, and I think Sean Strickland's last few fights have kind of are the reason why this is lined the way it is. I personally think that Sean fights to his competition, and Abus lines up much better with Pereira and Allen than he does the 6 guys that Sean's gone to decision with. So again, it's my 185ers. I do this quite a bit.
I was just about to say that.
I do this quite a bit, but I like fight doesn't go the distance as my best bet. I haven't made a play on it, and I don't think that there's going to be enough people on this to move this line against me, So
yeah,
I'm just kind of waiting for all the props to drop, and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be getting it at like minus 105, maybe something like that. So if that's the case, I love even money for this fight doesn't go to decision, especially with all the unknowns of Abus. So yeah, fight doesn't go to decision is my best bet. What do you think about that?
I was just about to say, I know you love the middleweight unders, always feeding for them. No, but I do think Boost has clear finishing upside early in this fight, and I think Sean, like you said, all the other fighters, they're durable guys. I think there's a world where a Boost drops off a cliff, and Sean does see a finish as well. So I technically don't hate it, and it's not like you're laying minus 150 or minus 160 for it.
And not to mention, not that I'm saying that Abus has any type of chin problems, but he can get caught. We at
Absolutely.
least don't even have to wonder about it. He has been caught before, and so yeah, that's another thing that I really like.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't hate it one bit, man. You got 25 minutes to cash that ticket. Damir Ismagulov, my best bet. I got to trust my gut, man. I got 2 units on him at minus 130, and I'm not cashing out like some of these other guys. I plan on trusting my gut and doubling down on him at minus 110, man. I truly think if you take away that Armin fight, you take away the possible retirement talks, and this is a minus 200, minus 250 type of line, man. The guys were running to bet him at plus 180 against Armin. This was the dark horse of 155 by everybody with the 24-1 record. And now we're just ready to switch up because the guy might want to call it quits. At minus 110, man, I've got to trust my gut there. And it's a similar style of fight. And yes, styles make fights. Dawson brings the style of fight that did just beat Damir. But I think we're talking about a different caliber of grappler here between Armin and Dawson. We're 2 fights removed from Dawson gassing out bad, getting 10-8'd by Ricky Glenn. And I do feel that there's a world where Damir makes him work hard for those takedowns where they don't come as easy as they did to Gordon and to Madsen. And I think there's a time where Damir actually finds himself on top. Like the Moises, the Alvarez fights, the Joel Alvarez, the Rafael Alves, like he wins those by getting top time. Like I don't think it's out of the question for him to potentially wind up on top of Grant Dawson here. And if this fight is on the feet for any amount of time, I think that's the clearest advantage anybody has in this fight is the advantage Damir has on the feet. And I think if he forces Grant Dawson back, the shots are going to be sloppy. They're going to be coming off the back foot. And I think he sees them a whole lot clearer, man. I hate that the public's not agreeing with my confidence on Damir. Maybe there's some information I don't know out there, but I capped Damir at minus 165, minus 170. So for it to be at minus 110, I got to trust my gut, man. So I plan on probably having, I think, about 2.6 units on Damir come Saturday.
I like it. Yeah, like I said, I might find a spot on it, but it'll be treading lightly for me. But I do like the confidence in it. That's what really is making me want to play it, is because I don't know. When you get this feeling, I enjoy at least getting a little bit on it just to ride that wave with you. It's kind of
it's not as bad as this. Like, don't blow this out as much proportion, but it's like when we got Islam at minus 185 against Charles Oliveira, when we're used to seeing these minus 300 and 400s next to
minus
his name.
165 is what I
minus one. Exactly. It's like this is kind of what it reminds me of. This is a clear winnable fight for him, and we're getting a very generous line.
How about Max Holloway versus Arnold Allen at minus 145?
Exactly. It's a thing like that where it's but it almost feels like it's too good to be true at the same time.
Like there has to be something you're missing.
Right, like somebody at ATT has more information that I just don't have, and they're to the betting window on Grant Dawson. I can't think of the last couple fights, but there's been a couple weeks ago where I was on the opposite side of the line movement for like 2 weeks in a row on some confident plays, and they were bad bets, man. I think Dustin Jacoby and Mirzakhanov was one of them, and Mirzakhanov puts a clinic on him pretty much. So it does worry me, but I think I got a very high-level fighter in Damir to back.
So moving on to our quick pick section of the podcast, we start off the night with an absolute banger. I was actually thinking earlier, I would trade these first 2 fights for the first 2 fights on the main card. I'd switch them.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a lightweight, Guram Kutateladze versus Elves Brenner. I'm all over Guram Kutateladze. not a lot of finishing upside, and I think that Elves is pretty tough. So like, it's tough. I don't even really love parlaying him just because I don't think he gets the finish.
That was my worry. I hate that he might not get the finish. But I think Aguram on his best night is 80 to 85% here. So I did parlay him, and Guram's going to be the pick. Alexander Romanov versus Blagoy Ivanov. To be honest with you, I was quite shocked to hear, that you were kind of favoring Alexander Romanov with me. It kind of seems like Blagoy is getting the love this week, man.
Mm-hmm.
But this man shows up at 235 on the scale like he did against Tibura. I might get a bet on Alexander Romanov.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like I said, it's kind of he's finish or bust. So you got to just bet him inside the distance. Hopefully, I don't know what that looks like. I'm sure it's not much better. 25 points better than his money line, but it's 25 points better. You might as well take it. Moving down all the way to featherweight, Joe Anderson Brito versus Weston Wilson. I like Brito, man. So I think he's powerful, fun to watch. I've got Brito.
Yeah, I've got Joe Anderson Brito as well, and it's like a minus 1,400 favorite, I think. I would really like to find a way to get Brito inside the distance on my card because I think it's a clear mismatch I'd like to take advantage of. Ivana Petrovic, Luana Carolina. I don't know if I get there, but I think this line's wide. Luana Carolina's my dog this week. Double the fights. 6 fights in the UFC, man. Striking advantage. I might let a half unit go. Plus 185 on Luana.
No, I think I'm with you. I like Luana Carolina. She busted Loopy. Yep. She spoiled that party too.
We got her like plus 200 against Loopy. I'd really like plus 200, but I might have to settle for plus 185.
But like, okay, how would you line Ivana versus Loopy right now?
Probably Loopy minus 200.
Right. So like, why isn't this enough value for Luana? Right.
I know.
I don't know. Loopy
I
doesn't
might have all 3
lady
fights
right?
I might have all 3 ladies fights on my card this week.
I don't hate it, man. So yeah, I'm with you. I think I'm taking Luana Carolina as well. We move up to the featherweight women's division. Yana Santos versus Carol Rosa. Is this our first disagreement? I think so. So
yeah,
the first disagreement. I'm going Yana Santos here by cage push.
By cage push. I think she has a lot more success at 135 with that than she will here at 145. I got Carol Rosa here. I think there's a lot of good things for her. Kevin Lee, Fakhretdinov. I think this could be on your main card, but it's a good prelim main event here. I just don't think the UFC did any favors for Kevin Lee on his comeback. I think this is a pretty tough welterweight fight, and I think he can emulate the style RDA did, man. So I got Renat to probably win a very dominant decision, maybe a late finish.
Yeah, I've got Renat to win as well. I really want to bet Kevin Lee, but it's impossible to trust him. You're guessing if you're betting him, really, because you just don't know who's going to show up. But damn, him only being 30 years old, all that experience, all that knowledge, he could come in and look like who he was always supposed to be whenever he originally came into the UFC. So yeah, Renat's the pick. Moving up to the middleweight division. Nursultan Rudzibov versus Bruno Ferreira. I tell you what, man, I need to look at this fight a little bit more, but Rudzibov, 40 fucking fights, and he needs
6'4".
Yeah, dude, he needs to get the fight to the mat, and Bruno, knockout artist, undefeated. Like, I don't know, dude. This is like another one where it's like Chris Curtis when he came in, he's just so experienced that alone. Then you got size and kind of Ferreira being somewhat one-dimensional. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going Rudzibov for now, but I might actually find a bet if I continue to like him. Watch a little bit more tape.
I think I'm going to side with you on Nursultan Rudzibov. I think there's potential on the record being a little bit fraudulent. At the same time, there's a lot of fights, but they're not the highest level of fights. But Bruno Ferreira is going from getting like a 5'9" swinging bombs Al Hassak Razan to a 6'4" guy who's going to try to grapple him. I just think it's completely flipping style, size, and the public esteemed Bruno since he opened at a pick'em. So the odds makers are oftentimes more right than the public is, and they had this opened up as a pick'em. So I'm going to side with you with the underdog, man. Moving down, 155, Benoit Saint Denis taking on Ismail Bonfim. I think the Bonfim brothers are legit. It's kind of like the Koski brothers were in, they look good. Then the Basharat brothers came and they look better. I think the Bonfim brothers are even better than the Basharat brothers. I think there's a ton of experience there. The skill set's there. I think he gets I think he's going to get a decision win because Benoit Saint Denis is so tough. But I think it's going to be a pretty clear decision.
You're more confident on him than I am. I actually think that this could be a buy low spot for BSD here. I think that it's a tough look to shake that Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos fight. Like, it was just crazy how much of a beating he could take. But as far as his bounce back with 2 back-to-back round 2 finishes, I do think that he could be a tougher fight than what I think a lot of people are expecting. And I was kind of surprised to see that Ishmael was getting Benoit here. I just think that it's a difficult matchup, and I'm kind of surprised to see how much confidence people have in Ishmael still being kind of unproven. But I'm with you. As far as what we've seen, they do look pretty good. So I'll give him the edge in this one, but I think Benoit covers his price tag, oddly enough. We move down to the women's flyweight, Ariana Lipski taking on Melissa Gatto. I don't have much faith in Lipski. And I think Gatto should win this fight. I'm not thrilled with the price tag, but I think she should win this fight.
Yeah, I got Gatto at minus 185 because I saw the line moving, and I was like, all right, let me do some tape, dig into it. When I decided, I'm going to pull the trigger, she's minus 210. So I still did it because I see clear advantages. I think she can easily hang with Lipski on the feet. Lipski's been finished for a girl on the feet. I think Gatto can hang with her there. But Gatto knows to shoot takedowns, and I think there's massive discrepancy on the mat here. I think Gatto could finish her on the mat, man. Then we move on to the welterweight division. Max Griffin, Michael Morales, your fight of the night. Potential to be a banger, man. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go with Michael Morales, but I told you I don't have a read on him right now, but something just tells me the athleticism's there, the skill set's there. There's a lot of things physically that the guy's gifted with that could still win him some fights at this level right now. And so I think he's going to get by Max Griffin, but I think it's going to be a test.
Yeah, man, I've got Max Griffin here. I love that I know that he's coming off a really close split decision win over Tim Means, but he's 4-1 in his last 5, and he had already been in the UFC for over 10 fights before that streak started. So, man, I know that he's kind of aging a little bit, but it does seem to me like he's finally finding that rhythm in the UFC, and this is a great fight. I'm happy that we're getting this fight for sure. And so I've got Max Griffin here. I think he's going to cover that price tag and some. We move up to the co-main event. Damir Ismagulov taking on Grant Dawson. And I'm gonna agree with you, man. I think Damir Ismagulov is certainly the more proven fighter, and I think that he's a better fighter all around, just more well-rounded, man, than Grant Dawson. So I expect him to get the win here.
Yeah, I think I've talked enough about Damir and how I feel about this fight. He's the clear side for me. And Sean Strickland versus Abus. I think we're going to end the night on a disagreement. I am going to take the established number 5, 6, whatever, middleweight in the world. I think it's too big of a jump up for him for Abus just right now. I like Sean to drag the fight out late. I think he's just going to take over, man, and do what Sean does best, win a decision.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take the number 48 fighter in the world. I'll pick a boost for the sake of the Quick Picks podcast, but the real play is the under in this fight. I like the fight doesn't go to decision. I was looking at it again. I'm looking for like a minus 130. I might even play the under 4.5 at minus 110, something like that. Um, that's how I'm looking at this one. I think one of these guys get out there. A boost is gonna kill or be killed. So he's my side. I think that he could catch him early. Sean, he's been known to not have the smartest defense against very dangerous strikers, and so I could see Abus catching him, just being as athletic as he is. So yeah, I'm going with Abus here.
Nice, man. That's 12 fights for us. A pretty solid fight night. To be honest with you, there are some fights that I think are going to be absolute bangers. Hopefully we talk the best of them. Hopefully we talk some of the better bets on the card as well. And man, appreciate you guys hanging out with us. We'll see you next week.
Peace.